Our guest today is former FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler. Tom became chairman of the Federal Communications Commission in 2013 and served until 2017. Chairman Wheeler was appointed by President Obama. Over 3 decades, Tom has been involved with new telecommunications networks and services, experiencing the revolution of telecommunications as a policy expert, an advocate, and a businessman. As an entrepreneur, he started or helped start multiple companies offering innovative cable, wireless, and video communication services. In fact, he's the only person to be selected to both the Cable Television Hall of Fame and the Wireless Hall of Fame. President Obama calls him the Bo Jackson of Telecom. And Tom is with us today to talk about his book, Techlash, Who Makes the Rules in the Digital Gilded Age. So Tom, welcome aboard to the program today. In Techlash, you connect the experiences of the late 19th century's industrial Gilded Age with today, indeed calling today the 21st century digital Gilded Age. Can you tell us more? What are some parallels in your book that we should consider?
Well, first of all, Kevin, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a privilege to be with you and to talk about Techlash. You know, as you said in the introduction, I've been involved in technology and technology policy for longer than I'm willing to admit. But along the way, my avocation has been as an amateur historian. And when I looked at the experience of the original Gilded Age, which was roughly the 1870s until the early 20th century, I was amazed at the similarities between the experience we're having today. And that became the thesis of the book, that we're living through the new digital Gilded Age. But stop and think about it for a second. New technology is driving change, creating new economic models, creating wondrous new products, low prices, accelerating the pace of life, destroying small local businesses, creating monopolies, creating great wealth disparities, causing consumer harms, and even fake news was something that was very prevalent in the original Gilded Age. And so I looked at all of those and I said, my goodness, we are an echo. It was Mark Twain who coined the term Gilded Age. And to gild, as you know, is to paint a coat of gold on something to make it appear what said was history doesn't repeat itself, but it oftentimes rhymes. And as I looked at those comparisons between what we're experiencing today and the original Gilded Age, and I said to myself, wow, this certainly does rhyme. And can we find rhymes in not only the technology area and the economic and societal effects of that technology, but also how to deal with it?
Well, the comparison is apt. Technology innovation in the industrial age created a great deal of wealth and innovation, often against the public interest and the rights of others. And as you say it's happening again today. Digital technology has changed commerce and culture, all while being essentially unsupervised. So who does make the rules? What is needed to really safeguard public interest from big tech policies and practices?
Well, Kevin, one of the other similarities between now and then is that it is the innovators and their investors who make the rules. That in the original Gilded Age, it was, in the book, I quote J.P. Morgan, who was the financier of much of the early industrial activity. And he said something to the effect that certain men of property can do with it what they wish.
Hmm.
In other words, we'll make the rules because we're the guys with the money. And there's a modern equivalent of that, a little more sophisticated, but a modern equivalent of that, which is in what Mark Zuckerberg said when he coined the term "move fast and break the rules." I mean, what are
Right.
we breaking in that motto? We're not breaking tables and chairs. We're breaking the structures and the behaviors that for 100 years provide stability. And why do it fast? Do it fast before people catch on, before so it can get inculcated before everybody realizes what's going on. And that's the kind of situation that we're in today. Now, heaven to Betsy, we all, you know, innovators and their new rules have been the path to progress for centuries. I mean, the great improvements in science, business, technology, the arts have all come from people who said, "Oh, I'm not gonna think like I've been taught to thought. I'm gonna think expansively and break the rules." And
Right.
thank goodness that happened. The difference between the original Gilded Age and the digital Gilded Age, however, is that ultimately in the original Gilded Age, we, the people, acting through our elected representatives, rose up and said, that's enough.
Mm.
That the rules the that the barons, the industrial barons, were making were harmful to individuals and harmful to the public interest. And the government had to step in
Mm.
to put guardrails and new rules in place. And we're sitting in a same kind of experience today where internet barons are making the rules, but there have been no guardrails put in place. And so, one of the things that I argue for in Techlash is that we need to have those rules. And I propose a structure for how we create them and what they ought to look like.
Well, tell us more about that. So in the industrial age, public interest or the public at large eventually rose up in sentiment and sort of forced the hand to put some guardrails in place. And you're saying now we lack that sort of uprising, if you will, and you're
Right.
calling for a new era of public interest and oversight that embraces a new process. Tell us about that process. How can we do it?
Well, first of all, I think that uprising is upon us. A new study out by Pew found that 68% of the American people thought that big tech was too powerful. And that it
Mm.
didn't matter which party you were in or whether you were conservative or liberal. It was a majority of Americans who said big tech is too powerful. We've got to do something about it. So when we talk about doing something about it, however, we got to make sure that we structure our oversight in ways that reflect the new challenges, not the old challenges. There's a
Mm.
uh, I was sitting with Madeleine Albright, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, one time when we were talking about the impact of technology on diplomacy, and she said, the trouble with diplomacy is that you take 21st century problems, define them in 20th century terms, and propose 19th century solutions. And I said, Madam Secretary, I'm going to steal that line because that's a great description of where we are in technology policy. And so,
Yeah.
so we need to, but when we deal with these new challenges, we've got to think in a new approach and not just copy the regulatory structure that was created for the industrial era. Let me give you a quick example. When I was chairman of the FCC, I had to interpret for digital realities a statute that was written in 1934 before television broadcasting.
Right,
and, and the world then was a little different. And they,
right.
you know, they did not anticipate what was happening. So we need to have statutes that reflect the realities of today rather than are anchored in what was yesterday. And so what I
Wow.
propose in the book is we need a new digital platform agency.
A new digital platform agency. I was going to ask, how do we do that? I mean, that sounds like a huge, tall order. And indeed, maybe one of the reasons why the tech giants have been sort of able to run roughshod because we have old school mentalities about legislation and regulation dealing with brand new stuff that is like brand new innovations.
Right.
So you're calling for a new agency to oversee this. Tell us a little bit more about that agency and how you envision that agency working.
Well, it's not unusual that when something of a big change comes along, that we respond by putting a specialized structure in place. The first regulatory agency was the Interstate Commerce Commission that was created to oversee the huge power of the railroad in the original Gilded Age. We created the Securities Exchange Commission to oversee the financial markets. We created the Federal Trade Commission to oversee unfair, deceptive acts or practices. We
Okay.
created the FCC to oversee communications. So,
Indeed.
so, so it's not fair to say to those industrial agencies try and play catch up with a statute that is in it by definition is limited. And it's not fair to the people to say, hey, let's see how we can put this round peg in a square hole. And so
Hmm.
what I proposed was the creation of a new digital platform agency. That's the headline, but that it also has to operate differently because the challenge of modern regulators is you're walking a tightrope between protecting consumers and competition and stimulating innovation. And you can get too micromanaging in your regulation and choke innovation.
Right.
Or you can just say, well, have at it, do whatever you want, and turn around and hurt consumers and competition. So, what I tried to lay out was a new structure where we actually clone the ideas of the digital companies themselves. The digital companies build their technical standards so that they can interoperate and all the technology works together. They build them by what's called a multi-stakeholder process where they all sit around and say, okay, we're going to come up with this standard. And that standard is agile enough to evolve as technology changes, as the marketplace changes. Think about cell phones, for instance. How did we get from 1G to 2G to 3G to 4G to
Yeah.
5G? And now we're working on a 6G standard. How can we have government oversight that has that same kind of agility
And how
and
do we do that?
encouragement of innovation? And that's what I propose we clone and bring into the federal government.
We are here today with former FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler. We're talking about his book Techlash, Who Makes the Rules in the Digital Gilded Age. Now, Tom, look, when people think of unsupervised or unchecked technology innovation, we immediately think of artificial intelligence. Look, AI is an exciting opportunity for some, but it's really scary for others. President Biden recently issued an executive order that aims to manage the risks of artificial intelligence while promoting innovation and competition. Can you share your thoughts on President Biden's executive order on AI? Is it enough? Do we need more?
Well, first of all, hooray for stepping up and coming out. I mean, I've been living with executive orders for most of my professional life, but I've never seen a 111-page executive order. It is a tour de force. And it was produced by the federal government in about 6 months, which is warp speed for the federal government. And so all kinds of kudos for that. But the president himself, when he rolled it out, said we need legislation that will address these issues. Because the problem with executive orders is, even though everybody talks about the vast power of the American presidency, there really isn't that much power to carry out a lot of the things in the executive order. It was
Hmm.
the order contains a lot of things about, well, you'll study this, or you'll create these kind of guidelines, or you'll have this kind of a staff change inside your agencies. But if you get down to the real nitty gritty of what is expected to protect society from AI and to encourage AI, you need the permanence and the power of legislation. Because the other part about it, as I say, permanence, the other part is that executive order is only as good as long as you're in office, and the
Yeah.
next person comes along and can change that entirely. So we need a common set of rules. And again, I think that the kind of agile oversight that I've proposed for this digital agency is what you need for AI. And how can we be constantly responsive to the challenges created by artificial intelligence and be flexible enough to deal with the unknown unknowns?
Now, Tom, before our time is up, I need to ask you about net neutrality. Net
Yes, sir.
neutrality, of
Happy to
course.
talk about it. Proud to talk about it.
Well, to put it in perspective, net neutrality supporters believe the internet should remain free and open and non discriminatory. Net neutrality opponents, including many tech giants, maintain that government legislation of the internet is an unnecessary barrier to innovation and growth. Now, back in September, the FCC introduced rules to help protect net neutrality. What are your thoughts on net neutrality, where we are today, and where we need to go?
Well, I'm a strong supporter of net neutrality. As you know, while I was chairman, we enacted net neutrality rules. Unfortunately, the Trump FCC came along and immediately repealed them. But let's go back in history and let's understand that when you have a network that is as important as the broadband network that delivers everything from Netflix to connecting your hospitals so you can take X-rays to experts, um, that that network needs to be open and non-discriminatory. And it's something that goes back, literally goes back to the time. The concept goes back to the time when England was coming out of feudalism and common law developed, which had a concept in there called the duty to deal. That when the lords were ruling everything, the feudal lords, um, they would say to the ferryman, "You're only who's going across the river, you're only gonna carry my stuff across the river. You're not going to carry somebody else's." And common law came along and said, "No, you carry everybody non-discriminately. You can charge for it, but you need to carry it non-discriminately." When the telegraph came along, we did the same thing with the telegraph. In the United States, Pacific Telegraph Act said that it has to be non-discriminatory. When the telephone came along, we said, no, you have to be non-discriminatory. And
Mhm.
yet somehow, when this new network comes along, the argument gets made, oh no, we need to be able to discriminate. And my comment to that is baloney. You need to have a set of structures in which somebody can say, is the behavior that is going on just and reasonable, rather than have the networks making the rules themselves. Again, it's back to the theme of who makes the rules and where is the protection for the rights of the people and the public interest in that
Yeah.
process. and the rules, you should not be grading your own homework, right? The rules should not be made by the same people who stand to profit by abusing their practices.
We have been speaking today with former FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler about his book Techlash, Who Makes the Rules in the Digital Gilded Age. And Tom, it's been great speaking with you today. We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, one last question to sort of sum up this perspective on tech and history, if you will. What should we all be thinking about and preparing for and doing now to be prepared for the world in 5 years' time?
Wow, what a great question, Kevin. I'm not sure I can tell you what's going to happen in 5 years. I've lost the Windex bottle for my crystal ball. But how we prepare for it is we have to be willing to think about new approaches to new challenges, and that we need to have the agility to be responsive with to those changes by by saying this is the kind of guardrails, these are the kinds of policies that need to be in place, rather than trying to shoehorn them in to policies that may have worked 50 or 100 years ago.
That is Tom Wheeler. Get his book Techlash, Who Makes the Rules in the Digital Gilded Age. Tom, it's been great speaking with you. Thank you so much for being our guest today.
Kevin, thank you. I've enjoyed it.